Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the program. Today will be, I think, the oldest date I've ever gone back since the inception of this channel a year and a half ago. I know a lot of this channel deals with biology, history, some chemistry, geology, geography, a little bit of religious scripture, analyzed through the lens of archaeology, and also human origins. And I think in terms of human origins, this does fall under that category, except it goes back millions and millions of years, back to a time called Snowball Earth. Now, it revolves around this period known as the Cryogenian, which lasted from about 720 million to 635 million years ago. Quote, that's when Earth experienced the most extreme ice age in its history, including a global freeze known as Snowball Earth. So this was the precursor to another phenomenon, the fossil record, which is the Cambrian Explosion. If you guys aren't familiar, that's when all multicellular and complex life really started showing up in the fossil record. Not to say that multicellular and complex life didn't exist before this point. It very well might have. But in terms of the fossil record, this is where a ton of them show up seemingly out of the blue. And a direct precursor to that Cambrian explosion event is the Cryogenian phase of the Earth. Now, to describe it just on its surface, so this is a period of what, 75 years or 85 million years? So within a period of 85 million years, which is already in and of itself hard to fathom, Earth was pretty much completely covered in snow for that long. Just that alone, it's an intense thing to think about. But then to follow that up with almost the precursor to, or the direct ancestors to us and to all living life now, all complex life, all at once, that's pretty insane. That adds so many more layers to the mystery. And that's pretty much all we know about it, except for a few things that they discovered by analyzing a few of these rocks that existed back then. So they checked the chemistry. These researchers examined the chemistry of the Cryogenian rocks, and they wanted to learn more about the world. One of the things that should be known about the Cryogenian are the enormous ice sheets, which pretty much covered everything from the North Pole, South Pole, all the way down to the tropics. Most land masses were united in this supercontinent called Rodinia. This is just the context of this time period. Earth's entire surface may have been effectively solid, so no ocean as we know it today. Although the average surface temperature didn't go far above freezing, there were some areas of the Earth that were constantly below 50 degrees Celsius or below 58 Fahrenheit. The other thing to know about the Cryogenian is that there are two big freezes, separated by a brief intermission of heat, melting ice, and erupting volcanoes. So we have this sort of this event that happens that separates these two glaciations. No one knows what it is, although they do know volcanoes were erupting at this time. Perhaps there was an asteroidal impact that catalyzed everything. Who knows? But there was some sort of high heating event that separated these two periods of glaciation. Either the heating or whatever it was that was going on, there was something lying dormant within the ice, or something was living very low-key lifestyle, so to say, before the Cambrian explosion happened and the climate completely shifted. We got where we are today, what eventually became us today. How did these? So the obvious question is, how did these things survive? It all centers around the ocean's ability to absorb oxygen, or the ice's ability to absorb oxygen. Obviously, if you're a complex organism, you're going to need oxygen to live on Earth. So right before this massive freezing, the Earth, this is a theory, okay? The Earth was mostly made up of single-celled microbes and bacteria and such. And then when multicellular animals did pop up, they were just very simple, rudimentary type of life forms. They were stationary. They were filtering seawater, grazing on mats of microbes. and they didn't really have innovations like legs, jaws, claws, eyes, etc., like we do now. And then in the Cambrian explosion, we had a huge surge in that. And the other crazy thing about the Cambrian explosion is how it unfolded in as few as 20 million years, which is again really fast for such huge evolutionary changes. Like you're going from bacteria to something that has arms and legs. That is within that small time frame in the scope of the Earth's history, which is billions of years old. So the fossil record suggests that the arrival of complex animals was already in the works before the Cambrian explosion, and they just weren't plentiful. Early in the Cryogenian phase, these things were living on Snowball Earth and in those conditions, and they needed oxygen-rich waters, which again would have been vital for these early complex organisms. And so what researchers have found was the idea of this glacial oxygen pump. So without getting too technical, the authors of the study looked at iron-rich rocks known as ironstones from Australia and California and Namibia, and they all date back to this glaciation. They analyzed the chemistry of these things, and then which they found that the seawater farther from shore had extremely low oxygen levels, but the ones closer to the shorelines, the ice-covered shorelines, the seawater was surprisingly rich with oxygen. Why is this important? Because this is the first direct evidence for oxygen-rich marine environments during the Snowball Earth, which means there were pockets of areas on Earth that could sustain life because of the amount of oxygen that they had, these oxygen pockets. And this is how they, theoretically anyway, this is how they survived the snowball, and then they later evolved during the Cambrian explosion. When I was first reading this, I thought of it as like, this is kind of like the beta testing of some sort of like sandbox video game. And then when it went live, that's the Cambrian explosion. That's when everything got way more sophisticated, and the possibilities seemed to be endless. Whereas before the explosion, it seemed like, according to the fossil record anyway, again, there could have been multicellular. There definitely was multicellular, and there definitely was a complex life. But again, not a lot was going on from what we can gather. And then the Cambrian explosion happens. So this evidence suggests that although much of the oceans during the deep freeze would have been uninhabitable due to a lack of oxygen, in areas where the grounded ice sheets begins to float, there was a critical supply of oxygenated meltwater. So what that means is the least freezing areas tended to support this complex life, and they were able to hang on until something happened. Again, the Cambrian explosion happens. No one really knows why, but this is a huge clue, and it could be explained by some sort of abrupt climate shift. This trend can be explained by what we call a glacial oxygen pump. Air bubbles trapped in the glacial ice are released into the water as it melts, enriching it with oxygen. The snow holds air bubbles, including oxygen, that become trapped in the ice. Those bubbles move down through the ice over time, escaping with meltwater from the underside of the glacier. And all this glacier science is pretty much down pat. They know there's a lot more going on than it just being a giant glacier moving across the surface of the Earth. I mean, it has its own system where water flows within the glacier, where it escapes. So it's pretty open and shut science, but it's really hard to picture this without some diagram. So there are hints that specific conditions of the Cryogenian might have helped pave the way for the Cambrian explosion. This is where it gets interesting. The fact that global freeze occurred before the evolution of complex animals suggests a link between Snowball Earth and animal evolution. These harsh conditions could have stimulated their diversification to more complex forms. I think a few times in my channel I've talked about dormant DNA becoming activated based on certain requirements, so to speak, not requirements, certain variables being met, either in the atmosphere or within the or in the environment or in the biological body itself. Either way, there are different environmental triggers within DNA that could, like an on and off switch, can trigger certain things in the genetics and the genes. That's been something talked about for a long time. This idea isn't new. So if that were to be true, then it totally makes sense when you think about animal evolution as we know it today, the Cambrian Explosion, and how right before then were a set of extremely harsh environmental conditions that in order to survive it, they had to adapt or die. So the ones that did adapt, they adapted because as a direct consequence of the harsh conditions. So they had to diversify into more complex forms. And then once they got through the harshest part of Earth's history, this cryogenian rather, this period of 85 million years, then once things started getting warmer, it became easier to branch out, and that complex life begat more complex life, begat more, and then here we are today. That's the theory here. Huge amounts of melt. By the way, I know the comments are going to be really, or this is a pretty polarizing idea to talk about. But again, it's just ideas. We're just talking about it to be out there. I've not once said whether I accept or deny this. I'm just saying that this is what they found through further examination of what we have on the table. So I don't think I'm in no position to decide whether or not, or one way or the other, with any authority. I just go with what I know currently and what the data says. The dates here could be completely off too, but the fact that they've come to those conclusions is pretty interesting, especially since the Earth really was covered in pretty much all snow, separated by this weird instance of high heat. That in and of itself is, I'm still wrapping my head around that. Huge amounts of meltwater surged into Earth's oceans, along with a few key ingredients, courtesy of Snowball Earth. And then from there, the Earth was frozen for over 50 million years. Huge glaciers ground entire mountain ranges of powder that released nutrients. And then when the snow melted during extreme global heating event, again, this global heating event is a recurring theme whenever history-altering things happen. Tends to always be some sort of global event. Rivers wash torrents of nutrients into the ocean, and from there, life finds a way, as they say, right? The combo of dense nutrients and cooling seawater created ideal conditions for an explosion of marine algae around the world. Oceans previously ruled by bacteria were now dominated by larger, more complex organisms, whose abundance provided the fuel for even bigger, more elaborate species to evolve. These were the forebears of the Cambrian Explosion. Okay, so yeah, you guys can see basically the gaps that have just been filled in there. These large and nutritious organisms at the base of the food web provided the bursts of energy required for the evolution of more complex ecosystems. Again, increasingly large, increasingly complex, including us, humans, that could thrive on Earth. Now, again, this is the theory. I wonder now, if the Library of Alexandria wasn't burned down, or if we could pick the brains of some of the classical Western philosophers, I wonder if there's some sort of allegory that harkens back to something like this. Some sort of legend. There probably is one, and I probably know of it, but I just can't summon it in my mind at this very moment. But if you guys know of like some sort of story that could corroborate this somehow, if argued, and if there's ample evidence, it can't just be complete out of left field. But I mean, if there's some compelling details in whatever allegory or story or legend, myth, whatever it is, that could somewhat parallel this origin story of what we found in science, I wonder if there's a consistency. I wonder if there's a correlation there, of an ice, of when the world was covered in ice, and then this heating event happened, this miraculous event, and then these survivors go on to thrive and evolve and get better and become more complex, become almost augmented by this genetic augmentation where they just keep specializing and adapting. I wonder if that's in any story. Anyway, I just thought this article's a lot different from what I normally cover, but it still is human origins to me, because we're talking about the Cambrian Explosion, which is an undeniable fact in the fossil record. Well, people still dispute the Cambrian Explosion. Some people, a lot of it, people think that it's fabricated. A lot of stuff is inflated, and it very well might be, but the fossil record is still something. It still counts for something, and it's, as far as I can tell, it's hard evidence because these are directly what was on the Earth that we found. Unless, of course, everything is fabricated and all this is a hoax. If that's the case, I will stand corrected, but I just don't see any compelling evidence for that right now. So if you're one of those guys, that's just where I stand on it. You're allowed to have your opinion, of course. I respect your opinion. But everything I say is just based off of this article here and what they're citing, just for all intents and purposes for the rest of the episode. So yeah, how did animals survive Snowball Earth? Is Snowball Earth BS? Have you guys heard any legends? What do you guys think about the Cambrian Explosion? What do you guys think about human origins? Our predecessors were definitely branched off from them, but since the Cambrian Explosion, there have been a number of extinction level events. It's just that humans weren't wiped out, or the human line anyway wasn't wiped out. So, or are humans separate from this? Are humans just our own thing? Did we come here at a way later time? Were we placed here, and everything in the fossil record was just non-human? It was just part of the environment, part of Earth's history, and then human history does not necessarily coincide with Earth's history until much later, after the Cambrian Explosion. Let me know what you guys think. There's so many things. If you guys think it's aliens, if you think it's Bigfoot, whatever it is, I just want you guys to give me. I just want to know what you guys think and what you guys know, so we can compare notes here. And I think that's about it, guys. Again, this is really late at night, so I'm sorry if I seem out of it, but I thought this was really fascinating. And again, I'm also don't know that much about Snowball Earth as well. I had to do some quick research on it, and all I know is that it's a very promising area that I think should be looked into further. And again, it all helps contribute to this one ultimate goal, which is to try to put the visual representations together, these bits and pieces together, to try to get a clear picture on what was going on with history while we still can. So yeah, let me know what you guys think, and I'll talk to you guys later.